What is fascism? Well, according to those on the right, fascism is just what people on the left label things that they don't like. And to some extent, I've often believed or said the same thing. I've been rethinking that a little bit lately because I feel like there's also this thing where the right wants to call everything that they don't like socialism, but yet they fail to realize their own, what you could maybe describe as at least the way they define socialism, their own socialist like thinking, right? When they talk about American interests or when they talk about a need to make sure that, well, the American worker needs to be protected at the expense of immigrants, right? They're invoking a collectivist mindset, which is really what they're talking about when they're saying that they hate the left because they hate socialism. It's not that they hate the idea of worker co-ops. They don't have to hate the idea of a business being owned by a group of individuals rather than just a private owner, because there's forms of socialism or mutualism that can be employed in that sort of fashion, which I think are completely in keeping with the principles of liberty and in free markets. But they're against a collectivism where people identify, with the group rather than the individual. Which, yeah, I'm against that kind of collectivism. But the problem is they aren't. They're completely fine with their type of collectivism. And so if they're wrong about collectivism and wrong about socialism and apply those incorrectly, well, who's to say that their understanding of fascism is really any better? And so that's what I want to talk about tonight. I want to get into what is fascism, not just like a textbook definition of fascism, but like what are the markers of not just a fully blown totalitarian fascist state, but like what are the markers of a society that's heading there both politically and economically and also socially and culturally. Joining me in that endeavor to also do a little bit of the continuing post-mortem on why people in the liberty movement supported Trump and have come to regret that, and if we should have, why we perhaps should have known better in the first place. And this person gets credit for not only being right on a bunch of things, but for doing his darndest to try to talk me out of it beforehand, and for sticking around and continuing to be a good friend of myself personally and of the show, the one and only Jeremiah Harding, who I'm going to bring up to the stage right now. Jeremiah, how you doing tonight?
Hey, yeah, since last time I got another Sonic poster, so that'll be great for your audience to get very upset about. Um,
I
the
almost called you. I almost thought about referring to you as everyone's favorite hedgehog, but I was like, I don't know if that would mean like that we like you more than Sonic. I don't know where you would stand on that. Where does where that hierarchy should be?
Well, everyone doesn't believe anything. I believe people should be represented by themselves, and personally, I think like hedgehog, like favoritism varies based on groups. So I will never, whenever somebody says everybody or nobody, I kind of like I get my hackles up because like it's like if everybody believes this, then why are you trying to convince somebody who doesn't? If nobody believes this, then you wouldn't like be arguing with the person who allegedly believes it, right? And so like whenever I don't like things where everybody and nobody are cited as sources because there are people with like wildly divergent ways of thinking, and I feel like that's one of the things that like a lot of people fall into the trap of in politics. And it's certainly something that fascism tries to enable in the regard of like trying to claim that the group believes something and then saying that because of that, the person at the helm of the country that's been, elected by the fascists, therefore represents the people and therefore represents everybody. And anybody who falls afoul of that is clearly just, acting outside natural national interests and, should be expelled, exterminated, as fucking Michael Knowles said, eradicated from public existence.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of things that like, so I don't do everybody, I don't do nobody. There's always going to be somebody who believes something you don't. And the diversity and lack of homogeneity are the spice of life because, if those don't exist, then it's almost certain that you have fascism. And the closer you get to that homogeneity, the closer you get to fascism. Because, like, you want to ask what fascism is. To me, I think the word fascism can essentially be comprised of homogeneity. It is,
Hmm,
we are trying to drive toward a singular type of person that is acceptable in society, and anybody who is not needs to be crushed. Um,
hmm.
it's where you get palingenetic ultranationalism. It's where you get the idea of, unity equals strength. But simultaneously, we need to divide from a significant group of people. You know, those sorts of mentalities are the sorts of mentalities that have pervaded every fascist regime, from Mussolini to Hitler to Pinochet to, Maloney to any number of other, like, administrations that have, like, essentially either openly accepted this as the ideology, or, somehow disguised it under, like, tons and tons of, like, oh no, we just want sensible border policy or some shit
Now,
like
would
that.
you say that, because one might say that there are what have been known as communist or socialist regimes that could be described as trying to achieve a certain homogeneity of a type. But would you say that those were essentially fascist regimes, just or varying levels of fascist regimes that were pretending they were trying to engage in? So, because I know you're kind of more of the I don't know exactly. You don't exactly wear anarchist labels, but I know you're at least not anti, anarcho socialists and communists.
So the thing is, like, I'm a big fan of coalitioning with everybody at the bottom. A lot of people who profess anarcho-capitalism are actually just married to the business ideal, and they don't actually, follow through. But, like, the same could be said for a lot of people who claim communism. Communism, as an idea, sounds great. And ultimately, when you started out with these movements, they had, like, lofty goals of worker protections and, protections of minority rights and all this other stuff. Good, sure, fine. But, like, in practice, you ended up with a failure of Bolshevism. Emma Goldman put it great in her essay about there is no communism in Russia. Um,
Hmm.
the idea is that, like, if you wanted to surpass the bourgeoisie, you need to fundamentally subvert the way that society is. Um, and you can't do that through a dictatorship at all. You can't do that through a transition state. You have to simply, strive for anarchy and a flattening of things immediately. Now, for the purposes of compliance with terms of service, what I mean is asking them really, really nicely. Because I would never advocate anything else ever. YouTube, that is all I'm saying. We need to ask them nicely to give up their power. Not like, we're supposed to, do anything that the founders might have done and be a little bit more forceful about it. This country is a peaceful country, even though it's not. Um, so the general gist of it is, like, when you end up with, like, a lot of these countries, Lenin literally said that that it wasn't fundamentally different under what he was doing, and that, maybe it could be someday, but it was still basically the same structures. Mao Zedong literally repeatedly said that it was going to be a state capitalist regime, and that state capitalism was going to be the way that things transitioned away from, the current, you know, sort of bourgeoisie capitalist mentality. And Rothbard, early Rothbard, before he became a statist, agreed with that. When he was, like, not doing insane things like supporting David Duke, he was speaking out against state capitalism and the idea that, resources be accrued by, some imperialist power imposing itself upon a region, and then collecting things like taxation and rent in the form of payments from people who, effectively didn't steal the land, but also, the people who did steal the land don't precisely have it ethically. So, like, they all basically, like, agree about what state capitalism is, and early Rothbard opposed that, and Mao Zedong did not. And so like ultimately when it comes down to it, we have like an actual paradigm here that could be accessible to the common, libertarian of any stripe, that like uh capitalism itself must be opposed, as its forms encourage the like accrual of power, but also you can't use a state to achieve any meaningful alternative to a system that relies on a state to exist. So if you're doing some, attempt against the bourgeoisie, if you're being a communist who's trying to fundamentally subvert the system, you have to fundamentally get rid of the structures. You can't just co-opt them like the state capitalist alleged communists wanted to. And so when you end up with those sorts of paradigms, you end up with societies like China, which are heavily worker exploitative. They have extreme poverty in a lot of China, and they have like, they lifted people slightly above that and then celebrated the success of the government. It's sort of like Malay in his country being like, oh yeah, we've alleviated certain extreme circumstances. That means I'm not going to acknowledge the fact that I've made it worse for a gradually larger amount of people. And the fact that they're like, that the floor has raised does not mean that there aren't many more people closer to that floor. And so it's these lack of nuanced like sorts of ideals that make the communists think that the Great Leap Forward had a lot of good things going for it, that Leninism had a lot of good things going for it. The tankies will make excuses for that sort of violence. But in the end run, I mean, those societies were still better for like anti-homogeneity. They were just like, they were trending toward the same sorts of systems as the state capitalists, and so they eventually arrived at very similar conclusions to the ultimate version of state capitalism, which is fascist economic control.
I
So
don't
it all
I don't
looks
know if there's
very
like
similar.
see, I don't know as much about the history of communist China, but I mean, at least in what was called communist, Soviet Russia, I mean, it
Mhm.
definitely seems like there was, maybe not like to the with the same sort of propaganda and fervor as Nazi Germany, but there were certainly like, killings of Jews and other
Oh
minorities,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so I mean, it
Stalin is not my friend, just to be clear.
you're not Nick
And
Fuentes, you don't think Stalin's based?
no, and I'm also not a pedophile, so I don't want him 16, untouched, and impure like Nick Fuentes does. And
Yeah.
I'm not selling Jeffrey Epstein merch either. Um, Anybody who likes Nick Fuentes at this point should have a mandatory hard drive check. They're clearly pedophiles. So the general gist of it is that, like, yeah, there were drives at conformity to the communist norms. I would say less of a homogenist conformity and more of a conformity to an ideological caste. Because like by homogeny, I mean like homogeneity. I mean things like gender, race, religion, that sort of thing. All of those had to be basically heteronormative, uh, Anglo-Saxon or other flavor of white, sort of like palingenetic ultranationalism, and driving toward like uh, a family that serves the state, and therefore the family unit is worshipped effectively, and anything that might pose a challenge to that is considered terrible and icky. The kinds of things that Hoppians like to jack off about when they like cite his Democracy, the God That Failed, and say that anybody who even thinks differently to us should be physically removed. Um, because they might turn into if anybody expresses egalitarian tendencies, they might be a homosexual or a communist or any sort of thing like that. They need to be expelled according to
Yeah,
Hoppe.
and that's where I depart from Hoppe and Hoppians. I mean, I feel like I I'm not one of the people, and we might disagree here, which is fine, and we don't necessarily need to get into it just because there's other things we should move to talking about. But like, while I do like Hoppe overall and think he has positive contributions, I always thought the idea of a covenant community was just this sort of like, okay, but like like, do you understand that even if you try to, on paper, have this whole thing be voluntary, that you are creating a sort of ethos where people have to start, going after people and like either criminalizing them or otherizing them in some way for what amounts to thought crimes. And that kind of ethos is against libertarianism and Christianity, as far as I'm concerned. And it's not really workable, right? You end up kind of like you will end up creating a almost like moral panic, like
Mhm.
we've seen in America over whatever that particular category is that you're especially concerned about, or multiple categories. And that ultimately, not only I think is not, it's like it won't be enforceable without then going, well, I guess we're going to have to violate property rights and actually just be authoritarians. And also, I think you would agree with me on this too, that that kind of uh, attempt to force sameness generally backfires in the medium to long run. Even if you kind of have some kind of short term forced like compliance to an identity, whether that's ethnic or whether that's a belief system or condemning certain ways of thinking, it's like that only works for so long because like you're going to like even if you like didn't allow any immigrants in, like you're going to have children, and I don't care what kind, like you can be the most sheltered type of like society possible and like not let your kids look at things, but like they're eventually going to see the world, and not all of them are going to, you know, um, believe the way you do. And in fact, overprotection and like being an overprotective parent and keeping them over sheltered is generally going to, I think, create the circumstances where they just sort of rebel as soon as they get the opportunity to away from your worldview, because that's kind of human nature. Um, so yeah, anyway, I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, but I think I get your point that there's maybe a slight difference in forcing a conformity to a ideal versus a conformity to a actual like ethnicity or something. You know, but I do think there's also an underlying similarity there where there is somewhat of a through line between these
Well,
different
there's
regimes.
tyranny, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the so here's the thing. Here's the thing that really sets it apart. Fascism itself is based on basically a fetishism of Rome. The Roman, like, economy, the Roman war machine, the Roman culture, the Roman ethos, um, it was all basically bastardized by people like Gentile, who wrote most of the doctrine of fascism, which was like essentially like co-opted by Mussolini, and then later, further still, Hitler, like his own version of it. And this is all, of course, Evola, that sort of thing. Like the general gist of it is, first off, you need a strong man. You need somebody at the top who it's basically claimed represents your people as an avatar. A good example of this that I consistently bring up is American History X. It's a movie, but it tells the story well, because in American History X, we have a scene that I think should stick out in everybody's head, where the Nazis fight the blacks for the basketball court. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, like, I mean, spoilers for decades old cinema. So like skip ahead maybe 2 minutes if you don't want spoilers for decades old cinema. Why haven't you seen this yet? You're a failure. But American History X, they fight for the court because Seth comes over, this out of shape dude who still thinks he's part of a master race, comes over and he's like, I just put money on this match, front me the money. And he comes over to his Nazi family slash friends slash whatever gang thing, and he's demanding that they front this money so that he can make his point. Now, our guy played by Edward Norton, he comes up and he acts as the avatar for these people, because he's like, if I just give this money to this guy who I know intellectually is not master anything, um he's going to lose the match and we're going to lose to the blacks, and we can't have that. So he acts as an avatar for the out of shape for the bad general like team that had formed. He knows on some level if he doesn't do it, that it won't get done properly. And so do they. So he whips off his shirt and we get the dramatic shot of his swastika tattoo on his tit. And like, it's a big thing, right? And so the reason I'm bringing that up is because that, among so many other things, is an example of this. He wins the game, but he won the game. And without him doing that, the overall better team comp on the other side would have won. Like, if they hadn't pulled in an actual exemplary person, then nothing would have happened. And so it's a slap in the face to the idea that this was a racial issue. And really, it's just like, in that particular instance, it's one person who's particularly good at basketball, acting like, well, now because I won this game, y'all have to leave the court forever, because that was the agreement, right? It was a race war on the basketball court. And people who watch the movie and don't get that that's the through message, that's the through putting message, that every single time they were always just looking for this guy, this knight in shining armor, to come and represent them and act and show how good their race can be. It's because they weren't. These people never would have formed up to do that race gang violence on the grocery store if they hadn't have like seen the avatar in this guy, right? These guys wouldn't have like gathered it under the banner of the knights without like having the initial knight to gather behind. And they're always looking for that core figure who they think represents what they want to represent, which kind of makes it amusing that in the present context, the core figure is a pedophile who is helping Israel, who is inking himself out of the Epstein files, who is dramatically curtailing civil liberties at home, censoring people and putting up a surveillance state, who is doing all this other stuff. But the reason that they're okay with it is because they're okay with any of that as long as they get the people that they are scapegoating away from their communities. They're blaming brown people. It's the same they took our jobs mentality of the absolute, useless feeders, the craven little cowards who like claim that, oh yeah, they're taking our jobs because, I would definitely do the same work when they wouldn't. They wouldn't, or they'd be out in the fields doing it for that same pay. They're not, because the jobs were not theirs to have. You're not entitled to that employment. But that's the sense of entitlement. And that's the other thing. It's a sense of entitlement. It's this idea that if our group was in charge, we would get what we were owed. If we could just get rid of all these trans people, all these LGBT in general, if we could just repeal the 19th and get rid of women's rights to vote, if we could just move back to before the Civil Rights Act, and the black people were in their place, then everything would be awesome. That's what a lot of these people believe. Certainly the David Dukes of the world, who late Rothbard cucked to. Certainly the sort of Nick Fuentes, Jake Lang kind of cast. Certainly the Steve Bannon sort of flood the zone cast. And it should be no surprise that those tapes came out where he was glazing Epstein and saying we should just go full tilt Epstein with all of this. Bannon is a massive piece of garbage. But they have to have this rogues gallery of absolute losers in order to like appeal to their new class, because now if you want to appeal to the kinds of people who believe the QAnon garbage, if you want to appeal to the kinds of people who threw the tantrum at the Capitol because they had never rioted before in their lives, they had no idea about OPSEC, they didn't know how to work any of this, but they knew how to get mad and stomp and break stuff. They were not trained activists. They were not involved in any of these things because they're not actually the oppressed. And so they went up to the Capitol, threw their little tantrum, and now Trump has to appeal to those people. So not only did he tell those people who had proven themselves at that point to be loyalists to his cause, which is all he really requires is loyalty, not only did he have to appeal to them, but he also had to get them out of hot water to show that their loyalty would be, returned. So he mass pardoned them. It didn't matter if some of them were pedophiles. In fact, those were probably his buddies. Like ultimately, he got away with like pardoning all of these people, and they got away with what they did because they waited out, they bought their time, and they sort of just like, after all of this, and Jake Lang is one of them, by the way. After all of this, they just gradually like seeped back into our culture and our society, and that's a lot of people that were at that. But also, there were a lot of people who were on their side. Who, if you didn't pardon those people would never be on your side again. So he bought a bunch of votes in that way. He bought a bunch of votes through Elon Musk's pocketbook. He bought a bunch of votes through aggressive advertising and primarying to the point where he's now threatening to primary Thomas Massey, and it's an actual valid threat. You know, he did all of this because he's their strongman, because they need somebody up there who's willing to say what they're, with unreserved, unabashed, glee, what they think all of the time, which is we're going to bomb the shit out of them. We're going to take their children away from them in front of them. We're going to throw them in concentration camps. We're going to strip trans people's rights. We're going to, gradually force a version of highly evangelical, highly televangelical Christianity on people. We're going to populate the faith office with a faith healer who's spoken fake tongues. We're going to
Ugh,
do all of this garbage.
don't get me started on that.
Yeah, because that's what he needs. He needs people to consistently be at his beck and call. He demands loyalty. This is the thing. He's the strong man. He's the avatar. They know, like, and he knows that the stock of people that he has on his side are not skilled enough. That's why they love AI, because AI can just fill in the gaps when all of these absolute morons who populate people's comment sections whenever they criticize Trump on anything, they don't actually have marketable skills. They just stay at home and complain on social media about the leftist Democrat welfare,
Well,
whatever,
I don't know
and
if you
they're collecting Social Security themselves. They're massive welfare whores themselves.
I don't know if
And
you caught the thumbnail I made for this live stream, but it was literally the NPC meme wearing MAGA
yeah,
hats going like, high gas prices are great now, right? Which could have been anything. Like I could have honestly gone with the We Protect PDF files now, but I don't think that would have passed the YouTube test. That would have been the spicier, more accurate thumbnail to use for what we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, I feel like one of the things which I know we want to talk about also, like, why did libertarians such as myself who voted for Trump not see certain things, like why were we more charitable towards Trump and how we thought he would govern, and you think, and other libertarians have told me there's just things we missed, and I want to go over that. But I also think that, like, one of the things that I guess I got wrong was that, like, we had debated this too. I had gone to the Rescue the Republic rally. I had gone to different events and had different online conversations. And don't get me wrong, I still knew that there were a bunch of, like, average MAGA hat wearing Trump voters who just, like, weren't very intelligent or sophisticated in their support and were just like, orange man good, right? Trump derangement syndrome in reverse. But it felt like a lot of people were supporting him for reasons that seemed to be more sophisticated because they actually, like, granted, they got a couple things fundamentally wrong. They were wrong about tariffs. They were wrong about immigration, but it felt like they were not okay with forever wars and that they wanted to end all the military interventions. It seemed like they were not okay with endless government spending, and that they saw a need to actually cut things, and that they were in favor of this Doge idea to kind of get the ball rolling on that. It seemed like they were not in favor of having government be in charge of things like our health care, and that we needed to get government out of the healthcare industry and also out of our food industry. And I mean, maybe the extent to which this happened, I'm wrong about, but I think you would have to even at least admit that compared to maybe decades past, there is more skepticism of corporations and corporate government relationships on the right than there used to be. So all of that is sort of what I thought was evidence for that. Oh, this coalition around Trump are not just going to literally, like, they're voting for him for a specific set of policies that I thought was like 25% I hate this, but like 50 to 70% this is at least going in a direction that's better than the status quo, and I like that. Now it's like, I mean, it's obviously all gone to shite, but uh we're like, I'd like to, keep going on the line you're going on, but kind of add in this sort of like, you know, obviously right now what we see is basically what you described, that everyone who's still on the Trump train, including a lot of the thought leaders, a lot of the influencers, podcasters and whatnot, like they have completely, well, I could say they've completely changed their positions. That might be too charitable. That might be giving them credit to say that they held those positions in the first place and didn't just, perhaps the answer is just they repeated talking points that were convenient at the moment in order to gain support, and they're really just grifters.
So that's the thing. Like, first off, something to note is real early on, Samuel Edward Konkin III called out the Libertarian Party, and the general gist of the American libertarian right. He said it was an attack on liberty and libertarianism. And the reason he said that was because he recognized from an early on point that, like, effectively, it had become a faucet for propaganda and not actually, like, a realistic way to achieve liberty. He thought voting for liberty was like, it's like that old thing, like bombing for peace is like fucking for virginity. Like, he said, like, basically you can't vote your way out of this. There is no political solution. We've got to just break away and start doing our own thing regardless, which makes some sense. But, like, one of the key things that he brought up is that the Koch family, which is, Nazi oil money, because Fred Koch was running the third largest oil refinery in Nazi Germany for Hitler. Um, you know, like, effectively, that's the money that would later go on to form the basis for libertarian actions. The Koch money that would eventually go on to form, the Cato Institute, and, they eventually kicked out Rothbard, despite Rothbard being there from the start. And the like the vast majority of, like, libertarian news and media, and also just conservative but allegedly libertarian leaning stuff, like, Heritage and all this other stuff. um when you get into the nuts and bolts of it, the Koch money was strong, and that sort of set the standard. It set the standard uh for, like, the general gist of the messaging and the slant and all of that, to the point where now, if you want to do something else, you still have to fundamentally say similar things. You have to be, one of those wellness foundation sponsored scam YouTube channels like Dr. Oz or whatever, or Jimmy Dore. You have to be one of those like Wilkes brothers funded, like, fracking empire shill foundations like Prager or the Daily Wire. You have to be following the footprints, the sort of blueprints that the Koch brothers set down, or you have to get money from Koch themselves. And in general, this led to what we have now. It led to the fact that basically every mainstream alleged libertarian circle is governed by people who are friendly to corporations. Um, and this includes, like, right-wing people in general. And so the thing is, if they wanted to fight a corporation, it was only because that corporation went against their corporate interests. It was never because, like, they fundamentally opposed corporations on the face of them. It was never because they had any ideological objection to corporations. Otherwise, they wouldn't, rely on so many of them. It was because those corporations were inconvenient. And so, in order to demonize those corporations, they would say things similar to, oh, well, those corporations are just, Soros funded Satan factories that are going to, come trans your kids or something like that. And it didn't need to be intellectual. It didn't need to be honest. It didn't need to be intellectually honest. All it needed to do is scare people. And so, a lot of the stuff that they say um, is, effectively, yeah, we don't like corporations because they're leftist, because they're globo homo, because they're globalists. We don't like them because of that. But then, if a corporation does exactly what they want, it's considered based. Like Elon Musk runs a bunch of based corporations. Peter Thiel runs a bunch of based corporations. The Bilderberg Group affiliated Yarvinites run a bunch of based corporations out of their based version of Silicon Based Valley. And therefore, those ones are good and based, and we should support them and suck them off. And anybody else needs to go to hell. That's what the ultimate mentality of it is. It's the otherization of certain corporations that don't toe their line until they do. And then once they do, they're welcomed back into the fold. Like, Twitter can suddenly be an awesome, news platform, and we'll ignore all of the similarities and all of the ways it's been made worse by Elon Musk. Mark Zuckerberg, let his hair grow out a bit and stop looking as much like a lizard, and he's eating lunch with Donald Trump, and therefore now Facebook is based as well. Any number of mega corporations just need to do that.
Well, and
The
it's and just to interrupt really quickly, they're kind of doing the same game they've always done, though, right?
Yes,
Because the corporations used to just be on the site of kind of the what was at least perceived to be like the conservative evangelical majority, maybe during the Bush years, but then they saw the culture was shifting, and then this is where we get like we've labeled like that like rainbow capitalism thing, where like I was part of like the Occupy Wall Street stuff. And I remember seeing a bunch of left wingers go from saying like eat the rich and like being super anti bank and anti corporation to just kind of like being happy to be pandered to by the corporations because they were pushing all those social things. And it's
right.
like now we could have a conversation about like you could say, well, some of the social things are actually still good things that need to be supported, but the point is just that we're not even here to talk about the social things. We're saying corporations aren't your friends. They will sometimes say what you want to hear so that they can keep on doing their evil corporation stuff and you won't. And
Right.
like you'll be anti-corporation when it's the other, when it's social issues or a cultural majority or movement that you don't like, then corporation's bad. But when it's stuff you like, then corporation's good. And that's kind of I think what we're
Yeah.
pointing out here.
And Democrats are bought by the same kinds of corporations, but it's different politics that those corporations are publicly facing when they do. Like, that's the reason Bud Light even tried to have a trans person on exactly one can. Like, the Dylan Mulvaney situation was an insane reminder of how, ideologically corrupted the right is, in terms of, oh, Dylan Mulvaney posed with one can that we can't even get on shelves, so we should act like they're transing our beers. But like, the ultimate thing there is that the only reason
My
they
main
did
thing was like, "You guys drink Bud Light? What's wrong with you?" But anyway.
Yeah, the only reason. So the only but back when I was drinking, because it's been 7 years since I was getting drunk regularly. I'm basically like clean and sober 7 years at this point. Like,
Good for you.
that when I was doing that, I would only ever have Bud Light as a beer bong kind of thing. We had a funnel and a PVC pipe. You shove that down your throat. You get it as close to the so that it bypasses the gag reflex, and then you take 5 cans of Bud Light to the dome, and you do like that's the way you immediately skyrocket into regret territory. So like, Bud Light is bad to begin with. The only beer I ever actually enjoyed was Blue Moon Pale Ale. So that probably says something about me that a lot of Republicans hate.
I like Blue Moon.
Yeah, right. We
I
we
guess
can both
I'm just as we established last time you were on, though, I'm actually just a closeted leftist. So
yeah, we can both be woke flannel wearing Soros agitators. But like, the general gist of it is like, right, uh these Democrats are bought by the same kind of corporations. And the corporations, Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch, They're warmongers. They have been forever. They're, big supporters of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman. They love Boeing. And like when these people were like, oh yeah, slay, they put Dylan Mulvaney on a can and had Dylan Mulvaney do a TikTok. That should have been everybody's signal to ditch Dylan Mulvaney as an icon of trans anything, because you can't have solidarity with leftist movements while selling out to the military industrial complex that is currently oppressing the world. So, like, Democrats are sold out. Like, you can have massive concerts, dedicated to like fighting oppression and whatever. And those concerts will be brought to you by Polymarket and some other teal shit. Like, it's like, when it comes down to it, when it comes down to the brass tacks, a lot of stuff is co-opted. And like the media industries, they love to pretend it's not. They love to pretend it's not until it's time to be. Like every celebrity that was like, basically, here's an unequivocal and complete support of the Biden administration and its continuation of the Trump administration policies on vaccinations and COVID and all this other stuff. Like, Trump laid that groundwork. Biden just carried it forward. And then it became a big Democrat issue that we have to support Biden's policies when it wasn't Biden's policies.
Yeah,
It
I
was
feel
Trump's
like
policies.
one of the things I think that people had said to me at the time of when I was saying I was going to vote for Trump, and I heard it, but I don't think I really listened to it. And now looking back, I think a lot of us had this weird, probably somewhat intentional, like but when I say intentional, I think that we were incentivized by what we wanted to do to sort of have at least temporary amnesia about the
Mhm.
entire last year of Trump's first term. To be like, well, we're gonna pretend that didn't happen, or we're not gonna weigh it as heavily as we probably should have, because I mean, that was probably like, even if you were completely ignorant of his first 3 years, like, even if the first 3 years were perhaps not, like, maybe we were right and the first 3 years were not that bad. I know you wanna get to why they were that bad.
Yeah.
But even if we were right that they weren't, it's like, okay, but that last year should have been the major red flag warning proof that,
Mhm.
like, no, he's gonna, completely cuck out to the corporations.
Yes. And then, like, here's the thing, like, I don't like Kamala Harris. I She enslaved a bunch of minorities. The fact that she's black and Indian does not change that. It makes
Still
it
a pig,
worse.
still a cop.
Oh, we've got somebody in the comments lying about me, saying I'm a registered sex offender. They always like to project the pedophile accusations onto people who they don't apply to. Your president is a registered rapist, so you can deal with that.
And
Also,
the difference here is that they're coping and they have no proof, which I
mhm,
saw your post and you were like, okay, where are the receipts? They have none. We have plenty of receipts
mhm.
for the claims that you're making about the people they're supporting. So
Yeah, oh, and by the way, Mike Shriver is gay, says channel reported. So thanks. We love reporting. Um, Either way, the general gist of it is, um, like, the whole deal there is, a lot of people thought that over the Biden administration they found their truth figures. They're Russell Brands, they're Jimmy Dores, they're like, the whole mentality that they're RFK Jr. is going to tell us how to be healthy after he snorted coke off a bathroom seat and did a bunch of heroin and a bunch of things like that. And he hung out with Epstein and did dinosaur bone hunting, you
it's a
know?
really good impression.
Yeah, I'm good at things like that. And so, like, he's exactly an example of this. Like, oh yeah, he's gonna be the representative for Maha. He shills supplements. That's the furthest he went in that direction. And like, a lot of these people just did that. They just parroted people who are in this like right-wing fake anti-corporate pipeline where like they were all sponsored by the same corporations, like the wellness company or something like that, being like, we're going to sell massively overpriced vitamins and regimens and emergency kits, and we're going to sell subscriptions to it, and we're going to tell you that if basically if you don't do this, you don't love your kids,
Yeah,
because
well, and this is where I do wanna pivot to some more things that you brought up that we should talk about, which is that, like, you know, we don't like Kamala. We're You didn't vote for Trump, and I did, and we're agreeing that that was a mistake for me and others to do that. So the options were either not vote or vote for someone like who was on the LP ticket, which was Chase Oliver. Now,
right.
I was never on the train of some libertarians who were just, like, vehemently anti-Chase Oliver and making up a bunch of lies about him and that were really and I actually contemplated voting for him. I actually even had yard signs for him at one point, and people there's evidence of that. I have photo evidence. I shared it with some people, uh, so I can back that up. Um, I did not vote for him. So the question is like, well, in hindsight, people have asked me this elsewhere. Well, who should you have voted for? And I've a couple times on X posted the only ethical choices were Chase Oliver or no one. And then people go like, "Oh, but Chase Oliver was for transing kids and, is just, the LGBT candidate." And it's like, well, first of all, I disagree with Chase on a litany of issues beyond just the LGBT stuff. Although to be fair, we agree probably on way more than we disagree on. But even on the stuff where I probably was more inclined to have a beef with him on those social issues. It's like, well, people aren't even being really fair about what his actual positions were because he was actually against surgeries for minors. And he said that anything else should be between a parent and the doctor and the, child. And like, you know, to some extent, although I don't think that children should be on a lot of or really any of these treatments that are under that umbrella of gender affirming care. It's like the libertarian position is basically to say the state shouldn't regulate that stuff because like it's not qualified to and it's a totalitarian nightmare slippery slope to give it the power to regulate that stuff and to say, here's what you're allowed to give people and here's what you're not allowed to give people. So, you know, the other thing here being though that like just shovel that to the side, right? I think Hody's in the comments, he knows like anyone confusing me for a leftist economically or on social issues is an idiot. I think you would vouch for that. I have pretty strong feelings on this stuff. But I think I was kind of a useful idiot for the culture war and the corporations in this regard. Because at the end of the day, like, if I'm not going to vote for Chase Oliver because of like what really does amount to a really fringe issue that is like, okay, so like Chase Oliver's anti-war. Chase Oliver is, anti state corporation merging, right? He's anti like the totalitarian border restrictions we're talking about. Um like Chase Oliver actually was the peace candidate. He actually was the candidate who was advocating for free markets. And on balance, even where I disagree with him on some social issues, Chase Oliver was actually the candidate. Like, if you're going to invoke the "what about the children" thing, well, Chase Oliver was the only candidate that, like, well, I don't know about Kamala, I guess, but he was at least, you know, put it this way, he was the candidate who didn't lock up minorities and that wasn't a pedo. So,
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like Kamala Harris, like literally covered up child sex crimes in the Catholic Church in her local area.
oh, okay.
She had the cases on her desk. So I mean, she wasn't necessarily a pedo, but she had less problems with them than losing her slave
What
class.
is it with the Democratic Party and putting up female candidates that have a past of like dubious
Yeah.
legal cases with like getting off sex traffickers or predators? That's
What?
not a good thing.
That's the thing. Pedophilia is a bipartisan issue because we're ruled by bloodthirsty death cultist ghouls. So, like,
Well,
oh
also really quick here, Hody brought up a good point, which is 100% correct. He said, I would wager that even you believe intersex people who go through puberty in a way that counters what they identify as. I think he means like they should go through that. And so you would agree that some kids should be on them, yeah. And like, there's all sorts of like gray area things and other things that aren't even intersex. Where like the minute the state, this is also, by the way, the problem even um with abortion, and abortion pills and things like that. It's just like any drug, any chemical that's in the healthcare orbit, and you think that like, well, we're going to ban it because I don't like it when it's used in this case, then suddenly you've banned it for all the other cases where it's probably a situation where it should be, on the table or
Yeah,
allowed.
here's a way
So
to think about that, like conceptually, right? If your son was getting gynecomastia and you didn't know why, but it was clearly triggered by early onset puberty, precocious puberty, and your son, for gender affirming reasons, because he felt like a man and did not, well, boy, and did not want to be look like a girl or feel like a girl, um, wanted to be put on hormone blockers, would you reject that?
I don't know if I understand that. So wait, if he's going through
Precocious puberty,
precocious puberty,
which is like early puberty, and in developing gynecomastia, because that's an often symptom of precocious puberty in males, is developing basically, female breasts kind of deals, like way too much
really?
adipose tissue. Yeah.
Okay, wow,
um
that's I
would
didn't know that. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously in those kind of situations, you wanna like, yeah, so like
so
even where I think that like there's always gonna be situations where
right.
people in their private judgment can be like, "Oh, I don't necessarily listen, I don't think people should get Botox probably," right? Like there's all sorts of things where like my private judgment is going to be like, I wouldn't do that. If it was me in the room with a doctor and my child, I would be advocating for this. But it's also like, hey, at the end of the day, who do we want raising children, parents or the state? I'm
Right.
always going to default to the parents, even if I think parents can get it wrong. Parents are in a way better position to get it right than the freaking state is. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and the other half of it is, then it becomes clear. Like, a lot of Republicans are on board with that. They say, well, if my son is starting to look like a girl naturally, I wouldn't want that. That goes against what I believe about, sexual dimorphism, about the gender binary, and all that other stuff. Um, you know, Effectively, what they're saying is, I have no problem with hormone blockers as long as they're blocking the hormones I want blocked. And as long as they're not affirming an identity that I don't want affirmed. If somebody takes hormone blockers because they don't want to develop into a male or a female, right? Because they identify as the other like sex, or they identify even as somewhere in between. Like, if they identify as non-binary and they don't like the expression as it's coming out, then the idea of like banning these things entirely, because like you're afraid of those things, but like being like in favor of a certain sort of more uniform identification, as long as it's toward the cisnormative end, it tips their hand. It tips their hand in saying that, actually, no, it's not about what nature says, because I'd be fine with correcting, any number of problems with medical intervention. If nature decided my kid had cancer, I would, put my kid through cancer treatment. If nature decided that, any number of these things, I might intervene, right? Nature is sometimes wrong. Nature sometimes does things to people that throw them out of their natural, they're like natural balances. There's multiple ends to nature. There's certain tendencies toward one or the other. And the idea is that like homogeneity must be kept, must be maintained under fascism. And so these people, they will cut off certain parts of nature and then ban certain other ways of cutting off certain parts of nature. They will cut off certain development and then also remove people's ability to develop in their own way, because their ideas are homogenous. Like, that's the thing. When we're dealing with this sort of mentality, right? We're dealing with the idea that there is a correct idea, and that we've got a settled score, that there's completely like no room for argument, debate, anything like that, right? we're going to isolate it down to that level, right? Um, when it comes to that, nobody's perfect. The Bible says nobody's perfect. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so, if you take that mentality, there is no perfect human ideal. There is no perfect way to exist uh, as a human, much less a perfect psychological or philosophical or legal interpretation of that. And so to force that is to have the hubris to claim that you have it all figured out and that no more questions are even permitted. To ban it is to say we can remove the ability to even have this conversation. And that's what Chase wanted to avoid. He wanted to avoid people like lacking the ability to have that conversation. And he had that conversation with a lot of people and
Well,
was
and
willing to like actually discuss it. Whereas Trump, ultimately, he wanted the issue as far away from him as possible because part of his base was Elon Musk and his anti-trans extremism. His thing of claiming that, you know, his son is dead and that because of that, like he's going to act like his son was ripped away from him rather than, you know, acknowledging that maybe he has a daughter, rather than acknowledging that maybe it's more complicated. And there are so many other people that did that. They had disgust for minorities, they had disgust for people who disagreed with them. And therefore, they're going to use whatever means that they can to get those people hurt, to get those people expelled, to get those people eradicated from public existence. And that's not just trans people. It translates to you know, Mexicans, Haitians, Somalians. It translates to Muslims. It translates in many cases to Jews, which is ironic since they also are aligned with a president that is
I
rabidly Zionist.
I think, you know, identity is a really tricky thing, right? Like beliefs and all that. Like there's so many things that go into identity, into our belief systems. And I'm not a relativist, right? So like on one hand, I get what you're saying, which is that you don't want, and I agree, right? As an anarchist and even from Christian principles, I do not think that society should be forced down certain tracks. I don't think individuals should be forced down certain tracks unless you want to like, you know, invert the non-aggression principle and say like, I think people should be forced to not force other people, right? Which is like a clumsy way. So like really what we're saying is we're against people using force, initiating force against people to behave a certain way or to forfeit something of themselves or something they own, etc. Now I might still, while I'm taking force off the table, I might still think that some people and the way that they're choosing to identify or the way they're choosing to behave or even things that they believe to be true about reality or religion or spirituality, like I might think that they're wrong and I might think that I am right. But I think the proper way to go about then like promoting that people make better choices isn't putting a gun to their head, isn't removing choice from the equation. And in fact, I think that doing that could be detrimental. And I'm saying that from someone who's kind of coming at this from the opposite side of like you and Hody and others, where like I actually have a close friend of mine who went through gender transition and then detransitioned, but his perspective, which I think is really valid here, is that like if all of this stuff had been illegal, it would not have allowed him to explore his gender dysphoria in a way that resulted in him realizing, no, I actually am a man and I don't want to go down this path. Having it be this forbidden fruit would have meant that he would have stayed in a place of struggle, most likely, or pursued treatments through alternative black market means that would have been perhaps very, as we see in other black market instances, less safe and more destructive to him and might not have. So it's like, again, I think that we can, with respect to individual dignity and without invoking some kind of like fascist mindset, having grace for that, the fact that, you know, I do think that we need to be. I mean, listen, like where we differ on this is that I have a hard time, like we've talked about this in a separate episode. I don't want to like rehash all that here necessarily, but to summarize your view, you think that it's what's your phrase? You say it's bimodal, I think is the way you You give like a 30-second
Yeah.
summary of the way you view
Essentially,
gender.
there are biological markers that actually manifest like phenotypically, not just genotypically, that create the predispositions to like certain traits. And there's also certain like cultural elements of it that shouldn't even be gendered at all, that it sort of are. But like the general gist of gender is it's not just, and I've said general gist a lot, I don't like that. The like sort of summation of the idea is that the existence of gender exists as a way to describe certain sexual expression. It does not exist as a locked in sort of thing. A woman who does not have a uterus because she had a hysterectomy is still a woman, even though she can't produce, gametes, even though she can't produce spawn, even though, there's a lot of stuff that, is typically considered clustered with the woman end of it. She is still a woman because she is fulfilling the ends of it. She identifies as that, and there's no reason to claim that she is anything else. That she is either a man or somehow just locked out of womanhood forever, right? That she's just like some amorphous blob now, some useless, like that's the kind of dehumanizing you have to do in order to claim that a woman is somebody with very specific characteristics, like the reproductive organs, or the chromosomes being very specifically XX, or a variety of other things
Right.
like that. And
There's biological and there's also social and
yeah,
cultural
and
elements to all of this. And uh
and sort of
yeah,
like two main clusters of general like identifying things that sort of spread out and get closer to each other the more vague those things are in terms of their application to certain like actual identifiable male and female cluster sets.
right. And
So
that's where we disagree because I think, well, no, there are still, I think in my worldview, people who are male, people who are female, and then yeah, we had the small carve out for intersex people. And again, I can link this in the show notes. I think you, me, and Hody had like a long,
right,
very long
but
conversation going into all this. But
but
like
here's the thing,
even
like
within my sort of like where I go where there's male, there's female, I'm
yeah,
like, but there's gonna be people within, those two camps that are going to then there's different ways to be male, different ways to be female, and people who might then experience like, well, I'm in this camp, but I feel like my personality and temperament associate more with this camp. And then
if
basically where this
yeah,
comes down to is that I might have, based on my religious convictions and based on my understanding of science and reality, I might look at someone navigating that and think there are better and worse ways to deal with that and navigate that towards an end that's better for your well-being. But at the end of the day, that is your journey to go on, and if I'm your friend, I will help you on that journey. Even if you go down paths I disagree with, I'm still going to be your friend. If my son or daughter go down that path, they're still going to be my child, and I'm still going to love them. And at the end of the day, no person who is outside of those relationships, no agent of the state with a gun should come in and be telling us how to navigate that.
yeah,
That's
and here's the other half. That homogeneity is based on the alleged utility to the social order, right? It's based on their utility to the state. The fact that you might, like get testicular cancer or prostate cancer or something that spreads to them, and those might need to get removed someday. If that ever happens, which, knock on whatever, like, I don't believe in that, but whatever. No, you know, invoke luck in some kind of way that it won't, right? Pray that it won't, something, whatever you've got. Um, like if it did and you lost the ability to produce gametes, I'm not going to stop calling you a man because you identify as a man and because you fulfill the cultural like sort of like hallmarks of manhood, and there's no reason to say, oh yeah, he's
yeah.
neutral now
Well,
because he's been neutered.
I think that where this comes down, which might be interesting to get back into this subject other time, is that like
Yeah.
I don't think it's just biology. I think we're born with souls, and I do think our souls are actually gendered too. But that's a whole separate. And I know you might say, well, maybe they are, and they can be born in the wrong body. Again, that's a very interesting. Like we could do a part two to that.
Right.
And I think like to connect this back to Chase. I feel like because of everything we've just laid out, there were people who were not willing to kind of like, even on my side of this, recognize the nuance of all this and the libertarian component to his position of all this. And they were just instead going to paint him in the worst way possible and use that
Mhm.
as an excuse to not vote for him. And yeah, like, listen, I'm still sussing out where I'm at right now if I think voting LP at all is a worthwhile endeavor, or if politics isn't the solution and we need to go full agorist or something to that end. But if I was going to vote, I should have either wrote in something like a a troll or voted for Chase. Is basically where I'm at.
Yeah, and
Um,
here's the thing, like, I didn't vote Kamala because I think that there is no political solution, personally. And this will disappoint some people who might find this later because they want to think that, oh, well, he's anti-Trump, so therefore he must be a Democrat or whatever. I didn't like Kamala. I didn't vote for her. I specifically didn't vote for Biden either the last term, and I hated him the whole time. Anybody who has like followed my stuff and is intellectually honest about it can tell you that I opposed Biden as well. That I don't think I've literally ever said a nice thing about him. Um, and so like ultimately, um, when it comes down to it, the last vote I cast, the last actual ballot that I threw in, I wrote in Sonic the Hedgehog for president in California, and then I sent that off. And the reason I did that was because the last real person I wrote in was Ron Paul. And the year that I wrote in Sonic the Hedgehog, John McAfee was not the Libertarian nominee. So my vote would have not gone to somebody I thought actually had any balls to take care of anything. Um, because the last person who I thought actually was interesting at all politically speaking who entered the arena was John McAfee. He had the right idea. He was negative, he was cynical, he was willing to yell at people, and when he lost the nomination, he went up in front of the entire libertarian convention and basically called them bigots, said they sucked at messaging, and said shame on you. Excellent. So, like, that's really good. I like that. I like somebody willing to tell people in their own camp, You're full of shit." I like somebody who's willing to, as somebody who's been through Silicon Valley and, the mega corporate US, whatever, became massively filthy, obscenely rich, and is still willing to say this whole system is wrong and should be opposed. You know, they had him killed for a reason. Um, and it wasn't because he like was, doing what he was supposed to. It was because every step of the way they tried to fabricate things in order to, bully him back into silence, and he never shut up. John McAfee and the Judd Weiss ads, first off, those ads got me into Gesaffelstein and health. I will never be able to repay my debt to the people who got me into those based bands. Anybody who wants good music to listen to, check out Gesaffelstein and Health. Do it. Go do that. And then secondarily, watch the ads on Judd Weiss's channel, because the ads he did were magical. They told the story. They had emotional impact. They like they exposed the scam. They highlighted the structural defects. They did well at doing what they were supposed to do. And if people had listened to those ads instead of backing Trump or, throwing Remax agent Joe Jorgensen in front of people as the radical libertarian nominee, maybe we would have had a cooler future.
oh boy.
Vitco, by the way, says they both are fire, especially health. LOL. Yes, and hey, by the way, listen to Disco Part 1 and 2 if you haven't already, because there are a lot of great feats on that. They did stuff with Nine Inch Nails. They did fucking Poppy. They did horror. Anybody who's willing to collab with horror has my support. HO 9909 999.
Also, Alex. Oh, I went to click on it. Alex said he literally had a dream once where it's not Shadow the Hedgehog was inaugurated as POTUS. Still probably better than Kamala or Trump. I mean, so uh, we got about 10, 15 minutes left here. I want to bring us to a little bit back to the beginning, which was talking about the this in the context of what fascism is and how to oppose it, right? And I think that one of the things that, even though there's still, I think like you and I are, if we were going to pose it this way, I'm going to actually undermine what I'm saying here in a minute. If we were going to pose it in a way, we're sort of, if you and I were not anarchist libertarians, we were statists, we would be on opposite ends of this so-called culture war, right? Um, but I think even when I was voting for Trump, I thought I was trying not to be uh, in this sort of culture war space. But I think to some extent, to a large extent, I was, and other libertarians who voted for Trump still were, because they, even if it wasn't like necessarily the forefront in their mind, they were still buying into this sort of like um didactic sort of like messaging of like us or them, and like if like the Republicans are the good guys, the Democrats are the bad guys, or at least the Republicans are the better guys and the Democrats are the worst guys. And I think what influences that is sort of like, not just, I think part of it was the policy stuff I talked about earlier, but I do think a large component of it also was this like this rhetoric, which I was also saying, that was like, well, we need to push back against like the woke left insanity, and so Trump winning and the Republicans winning will be like a shift in the culture. And to some extent, I think there has been a shift in the culture, but the problem is it's like we shifted again, as we were describing earlier, from one culture being sort of like peddled by corporations to another culture being peddled by corporations, but it's all kind of to the same end by the same corporations. Um,
Well,
and so I go ahead.
that's the, I mean, sort of. But here's the thing: those corporations were never leftist. They were never actually woke. Those corporations lied to the left, and certain elements of the
Oh, I,
left
I would agree
bought
with
it.
you. I
Like,
would agree with you.
that's the reason why when they're rainbow washing stuff for Pride Month, they don't do that in Saudi Arabia, because they still want the business of people like Mohammed Bonesaw Salman, um, you know, who, reminder to everybody, assassinated an American journalist by hacking him into pieces, and is now very, very close friends with Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and the rest of the Epstein class. Um, but the general gist of it is, like, there's that again. I don't know. I'm tired. It's been a long day. The idea is that these corporations lied temporarily that they support, the current thing, and then they, because of that, got to sort of puppeteer current thing and decide what current thing is supposed to be. And they co-opted things and therefore recuperated them, and then fed everything through a lens of mediated reality where attention is currency in the marketplace of ideals, as certain people say. Um, and because of that, the leftists who would have otherwise walked away and stopped being in their consumer base were like, well, maybe these people get it. They didn't get it. They never gave a fuck about you. Please understand that going forward. They
Well, and
hate
they
you.
also, and I agree, and I also think, I'd be curious if you agree with me on this. I don't think they really care about like the family. They don't care
No,
about actual conservative values. They don't care about God and religion and restoring, actual Christianity and faith to the nation, right? It's like, to some extent, it's like they kind of want, they want there to be perpetual culture war conflict because that's in their best interest.
they like the Joel Osteen, Paula White versions of Christianity. They like the David Duke versions of whiteness. They like the family as shat out by people like Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, and the like. They like the masculinity of people like Andrew Tate and Steven Crowder. They don't like actual family, and they're not trying to preserve anything real. They love what makes them money, and these sorts of brandings sell. That's it. That's all. They have bought you, and like, not you necessarily, but like you out there, right? They have
Right.
bought you. Listen to me. They have bought you, and the money that they use to buy you is a leash around your neck.
Right,
They
it's like
use it.
you're pro-family, except when it comes to destroying families through immigration policy. You're
Mhm.
pro-life, except when it comes to killing children and babies in other countries when we're dropping bombs on them, right? I mean, it's just you go down the
180 children in Iran in the past week.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I just feel like anyway,
And
I
so,
guess what?
all of that, just to be clear, means that you are the product, and that no amount of, like, corporation washing that people like Jimmy Dore, RFK Jr., any number of these other people will do for you is going to change that. You are still fundamentally wedded to it. That's the reason you don't care that Peter Thiel is in everything you do. That's the reason you don't care that Yarvin wants to abolish every piece of government that gets in the way of him making massive amounts of money and his sorts of people controlling the media. He claims to oppose the cathedral, but he is the cathedral. That's the reason he's in bed with the literal Bilderberg group that y'all pretended to oppose when Alex Jones was screaming about it years ago. Now that Alex Jones is, like, as in deep trouble as he is with all of the lawsuits, with all of the other stuff, he is now having people like Nick Fuentes on to do weird tours where Nick Fuentes is saying, "Oh, I'm going to vote Democrat now," as though the current countercurrent is like, "Oh yeah, we're going to ironically support the blue people because the red people didn't do what we say," instead of realizing that if anybody like Nick Fuentes tells you anything, you should probably believe the opposite. Um, like, he's selling Epstein merch. Realize that. Realize that this pedophile Nick Fuentes is selling Epstein merch. Anyway, so, like, the general gist of it, there's that again, is that, like, when these people needed to buy you, you were easy to buy. The Rescue the Republic rally was an example of this. The libertarian, like, cucking to him. It was supposed to be a debate that he did at the Libertarian Convention. He was supposed to debate libertarian candidates. That was the entire sell for having him there to begin with, is that we're going to have your presidential candidates versus our presidential candidates. And then that changed into a bunch of alleged libertarians standing in a big mosh pit having 2 minutes hate, mooing at him. I could say booing, but it sounds the same thing as mooing. They were just a bunch of cattle mooing at the presidential candidate who already oppressed them once and said he was going to take the guns, build a surveillance state, and all this other garbage, do wars. He bombed Iran already right before he was out. Like, there's a significant amount that he already did to oppress you. He was the architect of the lockdowns. He was already in bed with Saudi Arabia, who was already doing genocides in Yemen. He was such a cancer on any real liberty. And
Yeah.
when it comes down to it, people bought that because, like, it's easy to do that when the libertarians are saying, "Hey, he's awesome, and actually he came to our convention. He made us relevant." No, he didn't. And freeing Ross didn't do anything because he's not descheduling the things that Ross was selling. He's not, and he's bombing people for being like Ross. He's bombing people for alleged drug trafficking. The war on drugs has never been so violent. And so, like, all of this stuff, like, the the conclusion that I think people should reach here is, you went to the Rescue the Republic rally. Let me ask you, did you go to No Kings 1 and 2?
No.
Try 3. Actually go there, see how many people have no war with Iran signs, see who you can connect with on the Epstein documents, see who you can connect with on the conspiracy that's gradually unraveling, see who you can connect with on Teal, on all of these, like, authentically bad actors, and recognize that you're not going to agree with them on everything. But if you agreed with
But isn't
the
that I don't like, I hear what you're saying, but isn't that kinda like those people weren't doing those things back when Biden was in office. So I just feel like this is my current dilemma, which is that I feel like uh I'll again, there's probably this like small contingent of people who were part of that like maybe not the actual event, but the like broader coalition of people who are like
Mhm.
the people at Rescue the Republic, who are still saying the same things like no wars, health, freedom, etc. And there will probably be people who went to the No Kings protests who are going to be that hardcore remnant no matter what. But I feel like 90% of both are people that are just like, they're kind of fair weather. They're like, well, when the other party's in charge, then suddenly I'm against these things. But then when it's my party doing it, they kind of cuck out. Is my That's my problem with all of this.
So here's the thing, though. You'll never find the small group of people if you don't. And like I'm affiliated with multiple local organizations that focus on mutual aid and anarchy and opposing all of this stuff, and have some pretty principled and based people in them that I wouldn't have found out about if I had never gone to any of these protests. So like,
If your point to me is that if I'm willing to go to the right wing kind of protests when those are happening, that I should also go to the left wing ones, then I will grant you that. That's a fair point.
and the other half of it is that a lot of these people, if you're going to say that they're co-opted, okay, maybe some of them are, maybe a lot of them are, but that's your opportunity to prove that your ideas can hold up in the marketplace of ideas, and go there and actually talk to these people. Because here's the thing, maybe some of them are bought, maybe some of them are sellouts, but the ultimate truth is they're your neighbors. And you should try at least to have conversations with your neighbors,
Oh yeah, no,
especially in these times of divide and
100%.
conquer.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's completely legitimate, and I think that we as libertarians should be doing that. And I think that, listen, we should always recognize the moment we're in. Right now, it's kind of like if you're going to go to right wing events and try to preach the kind of message we're talking about, yeah, people, there's not going to be people who are really going to be listening to that. But at the left wing events, they are. Maybe that wasn't true a year or two ago. But it's like, I don't think that you would say it was wrong for me to go to that rally. But, and you would probably even appreciate the things I did when I was there, because I was there talking to people and finding the areas where we agreed, and then on the areas we disagreed, trying to explain why they were wrong. And like, hey, like, if you're against government intervention in the economy over here, and you understand how, like, all these wars and stuff, how they've raised prices and they're not good for us, and protectionism isn't good for us when it comes to that, then like you should also be anti-tariff. And if you're, so it's like,
So,
those are kind of like, I was willing to do that kind of like, yeah, let's put the ideas up and try to reach people on the right. But I do think that part of what I think that's the point I was making earlier, which is I think a lot of people like me, what made us easy to capture, what made us easy to buy, is that we had sort of, I think maybe unconsciously, um, accepted a sort of like one side's worse than the other uh, way of thinking. And I
and
think
at this
that,
point,
and that's only useful to the corporations and to promoting fascism ultimately at the end of the day.
like two things. First off, everyone here should follow two accounts: Antifa Operative on Twitter and Right Wing Watch on Facebook. Both of those pages will constantly give you a volley, a fountain of primarily posts about child sex offenders and other sorts of abusers and rapists on the right, but also in general, the corruption that comes from those. Because ultimately, like, these people relied on the just as bad narrative when the right has been building up skeletons in a closet for long enough that now they have to be hush until somebody like Candace Owens comes out, and whether or not what she's saying is real, at the very least starts lashing out, and then they're all just like, yeah, get them. They're all here for this like civil war in MAGA. They're all here for it because they actually hate each other, and they know how scum they all are. They know how bad these people are, and they are here for watching somebody else take the fall and watching somebody else be the one to make them fall. And that's because they know that the right actually is worse, that the right has had the power, that the right has been in control and fumbled the ball in every conceivable way toward ends of liberty, toward being ethical. Like, These people will, in one breath, tell you that being homosexual is evil, and then CPAC is like the Super Bowl for Grinder notifications. These people will tell you that they hate porn, and then tell you that somebody who like used to do porn should be the secretary of education. These people will tell you all of these number of things about how terrible certain things are, and then when it comes to it, they'll support those things. They'll support corruption. It's like when when a cop gets caught, um, speeding. He's like, "Well, man, you're not going to do anything, right? Like, I'm one of you guys." They know how bad the you guys is. They know because they are the you guys. And these people have had the power and have had to like convince people that the right wasn't in charge, convince people that shadowy leftist organizations paid by Soros Satan Incorporated are infiltrating your minds and controlling the corporations, banks, airwaves. They're transing your kids like en masse. If your kid goes to school, they're going to come back the opposite gender the next day. They're putting litter boxes in school restrooms. All of this like fear, panic, paranoia, the same kinds of things that led to the satanic panic and the censorship in music and media in the 80s is happening again on a massive and unprecedented scale. And they have AI now where they can literally fabricate a reality where they're right, so that enough people believe them before the AI is disproven that, you know, it seems right. That anybody who challenges their narratives is seen as, a corrupting influence. And if the AI doesn't give them the information they want, then they'll reprogram it quickly, like Elon Musk did, until it becomes Mecha Hitler and does exactly what they want. Like ultimately, it's the same exact thing. Like they're all in charge and they know that the right had the power. They know that actually what they're upset about is a gradual erosion of their power. They're not upset that, suddenly, the left has this long-standing actual power apparatus in America, and we've got to do something about the communist undercurrent. Only stupid people believe that. The real true reality is that the billionaires, the bankers, the corporations, the military industrial complex, they all are right wing, with very, very shockingly few exceptions. They're all a part of the ecosystem that loves that Fred Koch Nazi oil money. They're all a part of the fracking tobacco, or like that's the reason that they're waging this war on drugs. Meanwhile, ethanol and tobacco are killing millions a year, and they're doing nothing about that. They're not saying, "Oh yeah, this is just fentanyl evil," like they're not saying boats should be bombed because it's carrying Jack Daniels. They're saying boats should be bombed because they're carrying stuff brown people like. You know, they're saying that boats should be bombed because it's like, this is the corrupting influence coming in on our beloved like white homogeneity that we need to maintain. Like they know they're in power, and they know that there are enough people who are sick of it that they need to like, and that's the thing. The Epstein class, he was involved in all of their power. He helped put them there. He runs the blackmail networks that keep them there. They're all right wing. They're all parts of like the literal
See, all
monarchy.
right, so we're out of time, but this is, I think, where and we'll have to schedule something again for, like, maybe, either later this month or next month, because I think where we need to go next is actually because like, when you say they're all right wing, I
Hmm.
don't know exactly what you mean, because I'm just trying to think, well, I'm right wing, and I don't know what makes them right like, what makes me and them the same thing? So maybe you're saying I'm not right wing, or we need to so I think that's where we need to go with I mean, but that's gonna be like a whole other 30, 60-minute
Whole
thing,
new
which
ball of wax.
whole new can of worms to explore. But this has been, I think, a great first start to getting, uh, again, more of this stuff out in the open to talk about it. I think the key here is just to at least recognize, like, beyond just, you know, before we get into left versus right, like, I think the other thing that they're pushing is definitely at least that, like, well, it's either socialism's gonna take over or, unless you vote for us, and I'm just like, uh, I think we're way closer, and we've been way closer, and, with Trump winning, unfortunately, accelerated even more into fascism, and,
Hmm.
uh, I think there's a lot of people that are very happy to try to redefine fascism to just mean socialism, because if they if they don't do that, then it's kind of hard to say they're not fascists.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, like, they wanna scare you. Socialism is a buzzword to these people. Like, Mamdani required 2 forms of identification to become a government employee, just like every other government employee would have to be, in order for people to get paid money to shovel snow. People could have gone out and done that for free.
Well,
People could
and
have
like,
gone out and people could have gone out and, like, contracted privately. He didn't stop any of that. He just said, if you want to work for the government and get paid $30 an hour, you have to give us 2 forms of ID and like a couple pictures. And then New York Post said, "Oh, he's requiring more ID to shovel snow than they require for immigrant voters. They're importing migrants to vote away your capitalism freedom. Their socialism leftist Satan Soros." And that's because New York Post is controlled by a Rothschild, like not Rothschild, uh, Rupert Murdoch affiliated family kind of connection. His son now owns it. And these people are foreign Australian people who like puppeteer local press by like, making people angry and afraid and all this other stuff. They love keeping us stirred up because then America stays nice and toasty allies with Australia, and the industrial complexes of both can basically turn Australia into a giant intelligence base for the US. Australia has some of the most foreign, US intelligence equipment on the planet because they just sort of build US bases there, and use them as a base of operations for like Eastern Command. And so, like, they love this stuff. It's all about controlling and isolating power. Israel is America's largest forward operating base. The general, environment over there is there's a whole bunch of American assets everywhere, like hundreds of, military bases that aren't getting decommissioned like they would if we really had a no new wars president. Like, the whole thing is designed to serve their interests. And so they have to keep you afraid. They have to point at socialism and be like, "Ooh, left communism, socialism, Soros, they're going to trans your kids for Satan." That's all it is. Like, they're keeping you afraid of socialism because they have to make you avoid thinking about what capitalism is doing, what they're doing with capitalism.
state capitalism.
Yes. But that's the thing, like, we don't have ANCAP. ANCAP
Right.
might be a nice thing in the future, maybe, if it can avoid somehow becoming state cap, which I have my doubts, especially given the vast undercurrent of, like, Pinochet supporters and sorts of, like, Hoppian and other extreme authoritarian but pretending to be libertarian right-wingers who, like, pervade these spaces. Like, effectively, I think it's co-opted too. So I don't think that there's any possibility with these current stock. Like, Jack Lloyd is a Zionist, like
Listen,
there's
I mean, I get it. There, but I mean, I guess I think my audience is mostly comprised of the good type of ANCAPs. But yeah, there's definitely, uh, yeah, there's a weird selection there of
it,
ultra fasci hoppy and ANCAPs, and then Zio ANCAPs, which
yeah,
yeah.
olive branch, right? Olive branch. Dave Smith. We had a conversation on that X space where I think a lot of the stuff that I was saying has meted itself out to be true. Dave Smith used to be extremely based on Trump. And I made this nice little collage at one point where, for like, I don't know, an hour or something, I went and made this little spiral thing of like all of his anti-Trump posts being like on his anti-Trump tweets strictly from Twitter, just spiraling into him being like, "Why I'm voting for Trump" in the middle, because you used to be based on that subject. And I'm hoping to see that Dave Smith again. And I'm hoping to see a lot of people like that Dave Smith again. Because ultimately, y'all lost track because he didn't like trans people and because he enabled a lot of things that you had like been scapegoating people on for a significant period of time. It's time to come back to reality, Dave Smith and the rest of them, and recognize that in fact none of this was ever going to be okay. You could
Yeah,
be
I
based
think
as long as you're more like that and less like this.
I think we definitely all fell for fear mongering and fell for the current things that they wanted us to focus on. So we need to learn these lessons, and these conversations will continue as well. I mean, in general, as well as continuing with you in the near future, hopefully. Go ahead and just plug where people can find you if they, don't have enough, rabid, constant conspiracy theory in their,
Yeah.
and tracking all the corporations and Peter Thiel monsters lurking in the shadows in their Twitter and Facebook feeds.
If you want more mentally ill furry in your life, and if you want to join us on the Antifa terrorist side, then feel free to follow me at various places. Insanity is free is my username. Most places. I'm Jeremiah Talks on YouTube, where I will be uploading soon again. But primarily I do Facebook stuff at this point because they're the only people to pay me. And they're the only people to make me authentically algorithmically relevant. They consistently shove my shit in front of basically everybody. So you'll be able to constantly see thousands of people getting very angry at very like okay posts. Feel free, join the fray.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremiah. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for listening. Make sure you, do all the things, like, subscribe, share. This stuff needs to go around more. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. And I'll be back here again. It's a busy week this week. Let me just quickly shout out the schedule because I'm not usually this busy. Um, let's see. Thursday night we have another show, and we're going to be talking about Malay. So it's a shame you can't be there for that one, Jeremiah. But you can send me your notes on Malay, because we'll be talking about that. And then I'll be back here again on Saturday night. And that'll be with Phil Rain from the Libertarian Party Alliance. So that's what's coming up this week. And then we're always live on Monday nights, so make sure you're subscribed and follow me at Biblical Anarchy to get all those updates. But yeah, as I always conclude by saying, live at peace, live for Christ. Take care.
Thank you.